Soil testing is a really important decision-making tool. We use it to determine soil nutrient levels and other soil characteristics. The tools you'll need is a soil corer, a clean plastic bucket, a plastic bag to put your samples in, a tray to do your sub-sampling, and an aerial photo or mud map will assist with the planning of that soil sampling. The other really important factor is to make sure that your soil corer is 10 centimetres and take the time to measure it. An aerial photo can be used in planning where to take your soil test. Areas we don't do are around water troughs, around gateways, within 4 metres of a fence line, and other clearly different areas within the paddock. So within this gully here, we're not going to take a sample. And also a stock camp up the top of the hill. Once we determine that, it's very easy to work out where we're going to put our transect. And in this case, we'd look at a transect along there, and then also one back that way. That would give a truly representative soil sample of this paddock. I've got that end tree as my end point as a transect, so that's what I'm heading towards. This has an internal taper, so it always taps out backwards, and you just make sure that it's totally clear before you take the next sample. So this is a 300 metre transect that I've got off the aerial map, so that means I need to take a sample every 10 metres to get 30 samples. We've got a urine patch and a cow pat there, so we're not going to test there. So we just move off to the side on the same transect, take a sample. Once we've brought our 25 to 30 cores back, we put them in the bucket. We need to mix them thoroughly, and to do that we'll pour them out in this tray and break up all of these cores. While we're doing this, we remove any vegetation matter and rocks. Once we're happy that we've sampled that and we've got a really consistent mix throughout, we're going to what's called sub-sample. We break that in half, and then we'll break this section here in half again. You want to end up with about 200 to 300 grams of soil to put in the bag. Once we've got that sample, it's really important that you've got your name, your address, your paddock name, and the date at which you took the sample. Samples should be placed in laboratory supplied bags for postage. The soil test results are going to come back to you in a range of different formats. Use your local agronomists, Landcare groups, or departmental staff to assist you with the interpretation. It's really important that we use this information to make informed decisions on what you're going to do with your soil and make sure that they align with your overall farm goals.
So I wanted to do a slight little detour and have a quick chat about soil testing for carbon. So is anyone, and I think someone did pop in the chat that they're doing some deeper soil sampling for carbon as well. So is anyone else thinking of doing or being involved in looking at the carbon specifically in their soil? So feel free to pop that in the chat too. And what lab would you send your samples to? So I'll get to that in a little bit, how we get there as well, and what we can do with the soil samples. What's the best way to reduce your hydrogen levels? So the best way is through, I guess, the application of lime into the soil. So what the lime does, the lime absorbs the hydrogen and takes it out of the soil system, and so you are then counteracting some of that acidity. But also as well is the management practices that you can do as well. So
if I can just jump in there, Beck, just talking about soil carbon. So a big portion of what we're going to undertake over the next, particularly over the next year, is a kind of heavy soils program.
Yep.
And part of that soils program that we're looking to deliver will take into account carbon testing in soils down to 30 centimetres. So anyone out there that any group members out there that are interested in that, kind of let me know or get in touch, and we can start to put that together over the coming weeks.
Wonderful, thanks for that, Danny. So I'm not going to claim at all to be any expert in the carbon credits and carbon sampling kind of thing, but I just wanted to share a few little things that I gathered when I've been reading through what's happening with the carbon credits and all of that at the moment. So this is there'll be I can send lots of links to where all this sits. So it's part of the Climate Solutions Fund, which is originally the Emissions Reduction Fund. So it's had a bit of a change of name. So there's lots of information online about the soil carbon projects that you can be involved in. So they ask you these questions to see if it's relatively going to be something that you could pursue as part of your farm. So you're looking at storing soil carbon in grazing or cropping. Are you willing to undertake one or more new land management activities? And are you willing to increase those? And are you willing to maintain that for 25 years for the carbon credits? So if those things line up, then that's maybe where going down this path can be useful. So there's a range of eligible activities that are included as part of the Climate Solutions Fund. But the important factors are at least one of the land management activities has to be new or different to what you're doing. And that has to be over a 10-year process. As well, will those activities increase the carbon in the soil, and does it not include any of the excluded activities? So there's a lot of restricted or prohibited activities as part of the Climate Solutions Fund, and they're listed there. So in terms of the soil sampling for this, it's really, really in-depth soil sampling, and there's a lot of planning and stuff that has to happen. So baseline sampling is part of the process, and you do that by establishing carbon estimation areas. So an area where you're going to be doing one of those land management practices to improve it. So you need to establish those areas, then you have to do subsequent sampling between 1 and 5 years, so that continues on. The sampling has to be done by an independent person and through soil cores, and then it has to be done through laboratories that are using the approved methods of combustion or sensors for understanding soil carbon, and it has to be an ASPAC and NADA accredited lab that's being used as well. So each of those carbon estimation areas needs to have 3 subdivisions, and those 3 subdivisions need to have at least 3 soil cores, and so that's at least 9 cores that are done in that little area. The samples must be taken randomly and be spatially recorded, so your longitude and latitude, and there's a whole lot of documentation about how you do that. They must be at least 30 centimetres, so that's where the 30 centimetres is coming from in terms of sampling. And if you sample deeper, then you need to measure the 0 to 30, and then separately the 30 to however deep you're sampling, and then you can combine them. You also need to have a soil bulk density taken and understanding the soil mass, so that's part of the sampling. There's lots of other requirements that need to be sampled, and it needs to make sure that the carbon is going to be stored for the 25 or 100 years. And here's a bit of a rundown of the sampling process. So my take home is that it's really quite complex, and there's a lot of great information on the web that sits about it, but there's also carbon service providers that can help and be part of that. And so the government's made a directory of people that can support in that. So I just wanted to take a little detour and talk a little bit about that. As I said, not an expert in that space, and that's just some of my understanding. So there's a lot of complexity and a lot of thought that needs to go into if you're wanting to go down the carbon credits. Either way, sampling for carbon is important in understanding what's going on in the soil. So it's all important and not lost, but that's all specific to the carbon credit scheme. So why might you want to be soil sampling? So there's the plant agronomic reasons. So you want to be growing strong pastures and crops. You want to make sure that there's enough of the macro and micronutrients for your crops and plants to grow. So you want to make sure that you're understanding what the nitrogen is, which is essential for photosynthesis and plant growth, what your phosphorus is, your potassium, your calcium, your magnesium, your sulfur, and your trace elements, which are all important for how plants grow. There's other reasons why you might be wanting to do soil sampling. So it might be because you want to establish a baseline soil nutrient status across your farm, or you might have purchased new paddocks and you want to understand what's going on there. You might want to be measuring change in soil nutrient status over time. You want to understand how effective a management practice is. You might be undertaking cover cropping, and you want to understand, okay, well, what's that actually doing to my soil? So you do sampling before and the sampling after. And then you might just, because you've got a problem area on the farm that you want to investigate, well, is it a nutrient thing? What's going on? You might want to understand some differences. So you've got your red soils and your black soils, or you've got your good or bad areas, and you just want to understand why those differences are occurring. You want to make sure that if you are applying nutrients, so whether that's through organic fertilizers or other fertilizers, that you're just not putting too much on and not going to be losing it. As well, if you're interested in getting into variable rate nutrient application, you might be taking soil sampling for that. You might be, because we talked about pH and how important that is, you want to understand if you need to undertake some liming. Or other reasons might be because you need to document the nutrient status for different certification requirements, whether that be biosolids, organic, or your carbon credits. And you'll see this little detour sign come up where we are touching on the things that we detoured on. So that might be why you're soil sampling. Why would you want to sample deeper than 10 centimeters? So traditionally, a lot of nutrients sampling for soils is at 0 to 10 centimeters. But why you might want to look deeper is because you want to understand what's happening with your deep nitrogen and your other things like carbon that are happening deeper in the soil. You want to see if there's any nutrients that aren't being tapped too deeper in that soil layer. You want to see if there's any subsoil constraints, or just understand better what's happening in terms of the physical characteristics that you can understand, or to establish an effective rooting depth. Essentially, how much of the bucket is there for the different nutrients. Or you might be wanting to grow some deeper rooted species that rely more strongly on what's happening deeper in the soil. Again, you might want to sample deeper for soil carbon reasons, and the reason why they have the 0 to 30 is because that better reflects what's happening in the changing of the carbon stocks. As we touched on earlier, there's all the different soil organic matter pools and carbon pools that are moving all through the soil, and so the 0 to 30 better reflects what's going on there in those depths. So when should you sample? So I guess it depends on why you're sampling. Is it because you want to make management decisions throughout the season? Well, the best time is when everything's actively growing, which is essentially now, so late winter, early spring. It might be because you want to be putting in a new crop, and so you're going to want to take your soil sample before you're going to put that crop in, so you can make sure you've got the nutrients to push the crop through, which would be before you're going to sow, whenever that is. In terms of if you're wanting to establish a pasture, then you might be taking your samples 2 years before you're going to be sowing your pasture down, so that you can have time so you can actually correct any deficiencies you might have. So when you take a soil sample, yeah, it depends on when you might be wanting to do why you're doing it. So as well, what's really important is if you're taking a sampling, make sure it's post-fertilizer or lime applications, and wait for that to be incorporated. And you need to allow a couple of weeks for the labs to give you the information. So how frequently should you be testing your soil? Well, it's really up to you and your farm size, your plan, your activities, and what you want to be understanding and learning. For dynamic tests and things that are going to be changing, well, then you can do those more frequently. So, okay, we know why, but when and how. So hopefully you got to watch that video. But essentially, you know, it's something that you can get a consultant or an agronomist to do is taking the samples, but it is also something that you can do yourself. So when you're determining where you would take those soil samples on your paddock, in your farm, it's important to think about the questions that you would answer. Is it because you want to establish a baseline across your whole farm? Is it because you want to, you know, your fertilizer or amendments program? Is it because you've got a problem area? Is it because you're worried about your pH? Is it because of your soil carbon levels? And just remember, if it's for the carbon credits, that specific program, it does have to be done by a consultant. So the baseline, if you want to try to get a baseline understanding across your farm, it's important to make sure that eventually you get your whole farm covered. That can be really expensive and time consuming, but it's something that you can do. You could say, okay, the next 15 years, we're going to do, you know, 1 or 2 paddocks each year and slowly move around your farm to get an understanding. If it's because you want to understand, you know, some difference across your farm, well, then they would be the sections that you'd want to sample. So whether it's, you know, as we talked on earlier, you know, your flats or your slopes, your red soil, your black soil, where you've got your cover cropping and traditional cropping, or your perennials or your annual species, whatever it is, they're the places that you'd want to sample. If you've got a specific paddock or problem, then that would be also where you'd want to sample. And it's important to make sure that you, if you're wanting to understand changes over time, that you do assess your paddocks through then. So some helpful tips about, you know, where you can select in the paddock. So make sure that those areas are really uniform in terms of the soil type and the history that they've been managed in. And it should be an area that you're going to be managing as a unit. So if you're going to manage 6 paddocks exactly the same, then you could test them all as one. If you're going to manage, you know, one paddock really differently, then that's where you would sample. And there's areas that you avoid, and my colleague Greg did a good job of talking about those in the video. So just there's areas that you avoid, like, you know, where the cattle are camping, because you're going to have high nutrients there. You want to miss where you've spilled the lime truck spilled all of that, or around your fences and gates and things like that, just to make sure you're getting a good representation. And it's best to make sure, yeah, you're not sampling close to those gates. So when you're doing the 0 to 10 sampling, this was traditionally how sampling is traditionally done, and you can use a soil auger. If you don't have that, you can just dig your shovel in, make sure you're going to a depth of 10 centimeters and taking that out. You're taking thin slices, and it's important that you're not going to be sampling shallower than 10 centimeters. What you're going to be doing is combining a lot of soil samples and sending them on. So you want to be taking at least 20 to 30 cores across the paddock or whatever it is that you've deemed your management zone, so that you can get a good understanding of good representation. So in terms of deeper soil, sampling, unless there's soil cores that can be used to sample to, you know, they can go to 1 meter, 1.5 meters, 2 meters, however deep you want to go. Soil cores can do that. Or you can, if you've got someone who's willing to get out in the paddock and go deeper, so that's me doing a deeper soil coring sampling. So yeah, that's when you're thinking about it. But why do we take such a range of, why can't we just go take 1 core, send that off to the lab? Well, that's because paddocks are really variable in their nutrient levels, and therefore we want to make sure we're going to get as representative of a sample as possible. So this is from the department's research farm, and this was a phosphorus trial. So as you can see, if you just took your sample here where there's 9 and 8s, you get a very different understanding to if you took your sample up in the corner here where you've got 40, 24, 30. So when you take all these samples and combine them, you can get a much better representation of what's going on. So once you've decided where you're going to sample, that's when you're going to take your cores across a paddock. So if you're looking at sections that are less than 20 hectares, you can just take your cores randomly across the paddock and follow some patterns. If they're going to be larger paddocks that are going to be sampled, then you'd want to make sure that you are doing a transect, something like marking a spot in the paddock and then traveling across to get those samples. If you've got an irregular shaped paddock, then you'd want to think about how you're going to break it up. And remember, it's all about making sure if that's how this area is going to be managed, then we want to make sure we're encompassing all of that and make sure we're getting the best result that we have. So once you've taken your samples, you've mixed them all together and you've got your sample that you're going to send off to the lab, you want to make sure everything's labelled and you've got all the paperwork done and you remember where you've taken that sample from, and then you want to send them off pretty quickly. Some labs might ask for them to be air dried, which is you just leave your sample open and drying it up. So you can send the samples off to the lab. So I did notice there was a question there about, well, where can you send them? So you want to be thinking about what lab you're going to be using before you're going into your sampling processes. That they can provide some information about how to fill out the forms and make sure that the recommendations are going to be useful for you. So in terms of what lab to use, you want to make sure you're going to be using a same lab over the time so that you've got a consistency, because every lab is going to be slightly different in the method that they might use or how they're doing their calibrations and things like that. So the same lab is really useful, especially if you're wanting to look at trends. So there's lots of different labs out there. So yeah, have a chat to your neighbours or local agronomists or ag stores who might have suggestions about who to use, or you can just Google, such as soil labs in Victoria, for the specific enterprises that you're looking for. There is some important things to make sure that you're checking and you're making sure that they're having accreditation, and that was mentioned in the carbon credits that there's ASPAC or NADA accreditation, and that just means that their results are going to be reliable. And so you just want to make sure that there's accreditation there. Otherwise, the results that you're getting in any recommendations are going to be useless to you, because they could be calibrated against an American soil. So they can tell you some recommendations, but it's very useless for us. So making sure there's these accreditations is really important. And yeah, feel free to pop in the chat. I know some people have started doing that, some good services that they've used and found them reliable. What are some of the things that you should be asking in your soil test? So there's simple and comprehensive soil analysis that can get done, and that changes the costing. So you might be looking at about $50 for a simple testing, or the 100 to 150 if you're getting extensive analysis done of the soil sampling. It's also important to know know what you're doing on the paddock that you're going to be sampling. So, and there's slightly different things that you're going to be sampling and wanting to know for pastures and cropping, and that's because different methods of soil testing have been calibrated against different paddocks. So for example, if you're looking at a cropping paddock, well, an Olsen P, while it might be interesting to have, hasn't been widely researched or calibrated on a cropping pasture. So that result that you get isn't going to mean as much as the Colwell P, which has had a lot of research done for cropping. So it's just important to be aware of the methods. Oh, I'm going to sneeze. No. Oh, no. What else could you ask for in your soil test? So there's the wide range of normal things like your nutrients, but there's also other things that you can ask for, and all the different labs will have these available as well. You can ask for heavy metals, you can ask for soil physical tests. If you don't want to get out there texturing your soil by hand, you can get a soil texture, which tells you what your texture is, how much clay, sand and silt there is. You can also ask for total nitrogen and total carbon. And that's important because they include the forms of carbon and nitrogen that become available over time. So they give you a greater pool and greater understanding of the potential of your soil rather than just immediately. So the normal soil carbon information that you get is often by the Walkley-Black method, and that is more the available carbon, not necessarily all of the carbon or the total carbon, which is done through combustion and other methods. So there are things that you can ask for as well. You can also ask for trace elements. In terms of if you're looking at deeper subsoil sampling, you can look at exchangeable cations, your pH, your salinity, and other toxicities, and is there any available nutrients deeper down that the plants might be able to have access to. So in terms of how you can actually understand what these soil test results mean, some of the labs actually provide you with some information and some critical values. There's also, you might have an agronomist or an advisor or a neighbour or someone that you trust that has some good information that can help you understand them. There's lots of online resources, and as well, hopefully if there's enough interest, I'll be able to work with you guys again to deliver a webinar where we can specifically talk about understanding and interpreting soil tests. So in summary, I guess we've covered a whole lot of stuff today, and I've gone a little bit over time, so I do apologise, but hopefully it's been of interest and use to you in our chat today. So in summary, soil is really important, and it provides that house for the nutrients, the roots, and the water. Understanding our soil is even more important. It's so variable, and the way that we manage and look after our soil is all related to how much we understand our soil and how our soil will be able to change and improve over time by the way that we manage it. The soil is an interaction of the chemical, the biological, and the physical attributes. So it's those three things all working together to give us the soil that we have today. We can understand our soil through looking at the soil health factors that we went through, as well as soil nutrient tests that we have at our disposal to understand. It's important to really know why we're investigating the soil and what are our goals for the land. Do we want to maintain our productivity, or do we want to increase it? Do we want to be identifying constraints? Do we want to be good stewards of our land? Do we want to make our land, for amenity reasons, look prettier? Oh, I think my screen's about to crash, but we've almost got through. And good soil management in agriculture is about feeding the plant and the soil. So we want to be making sure we're looking after the plants and the soils, and then we can grow the best with what we have and make sure that we're leaving the land in a healthier state than when we started. So that's everything from me, and I really appreciate all your time sitting and listening. I'll just jump through if there's any other questions. So I guess, yeah, if you want to pop any questions in the chat, or if you want to ask any questions, then yeah, now's a good time to go for it. Otherwise, you can contact me. Here's my mobile number, or email if you want to have a chat later. So yeah, is there any questions? I'll stop sharing my screen and open it up for any questions. And my slides, I will be able to PDF the presentation, and that will be able to be sent through. And there's a lot of links on there which will hopefully be really useful for you in understanding things further. So yeah, I guess if there's no questions.
I think, yeah, it seems as though perhaps folks are a bit questioned out.
Yeah.
Look, thanks very much, Beck. Thanks so much for your time. That was a really wonderful session and really excellent information and advice and insights into the world of soil management and how we can better managed for more effective soil biology. So we might leave it there. And anybody with any questions or anything pressing that they want to come back with, they can email me, and then perhaps I can pass those questions on. So just to wrap, I forgot to do so in my introduction, but I'd really like to thank the North Central CMA for funding our program and funding our group through the National Landcare program. Without this kind of support, it can make it really hard to get these messages and this sort of work out. So thank you very much. Thanks Agriculture Victoria for supplying Beck. Beck, thanks so much for your time. Really wonderful information, really insightful, and you bring a real passion to soils, which is wonderful to see. So we'll leave it there. Thanks everybody for coming. If anyone's interested to continue on their Regen Ag journey or support with that, please get in touch. All of my details have come through the registration emails and links. And I've also posted a number of links. Follow us on Facebook. If you follow Loddon Plains Landcare Network, you can get to our agriculture group as well, the Future Farming group. And I encourage everybody to keep up to date with activities on there or our website, lpln.org. Beck, if you've got anything else, I'll just throw to you one last time.
Thanks for that, Danny. I'll just do a little bit of a plug. We've got a webinar next Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock, which is focusing on managing wet soils, so in central Victoria. So this has been quite a wet winter that we've had, and there's some soils out there and some paddocks that we know that have been exposed to waterlogging conditions. And so, yeah, we've got some great experts from around the state who are going to be talking specifically about, what's happening to the nutrients there. And so I've just popped that link to that webinar in the chat. So yeah, if you're interested to come along, I'll be doing about a 10-minute soil talk. So what I've chatted today will compress to 10 minutes, so you'll get a little bit of a refresher. But yeah, if you're interested in soils, then wet soils understanding, then next Tuesday evening. Yeah, and hopefully down the track we can get you all into a real soil pit, unlike the virtual one that we're in here. So thanks everyone, and thanks Danny for having me come along.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Beck.